Father in heaven, we are so very thankful that we have the ability to come out in the middle of the week and study from your word. We pray, Father, a blessing upon all the teachers who have worked hard to prepare and to be ready to teach these classes. We ask now in this class that you be with Bruce as he guides us through a study of yet another chapter from the book of Esther. We pray, Father, that you will help us see that although your name is not stated in this book, that your handiwork is very available and present in this book. We realize, Father, that there were a number of things that must have happened in a particular way to achieve the outcome that would be necessary for your promises to be fulfilled to the patriarchs of old as it related to the Jewish nation. We pray, Father, that we understand your power and your determination to bring things about according to your will. We ask now that you continue with us through this hour, and may many good things be accomplished as we yet again open up for a study from your Holy Scriptures. Through Jesus we pray these things. Amen.
Well, if you've been doing the daily Bible readings, we've got a similar situation there with Joseph and how a certain person at a certain place at a certain time and God's providence and guidance in the affairs of men, and now as we get into Moses and Pharaoh, that's just going to continue. And so we see that God's hand is never far from what's going on in the lives of his children, and I don't imagine that's any different today than it was back then. So we begin tonight. We're going to look at the 4th chapter of Esther. I'm going to begin reading back in verse 14, chapter 3, and bring us up here a little bit. But the edict from the king has been received, passed out throughout the kingdom. Not only is the city of Susa in confusion, but the Jewish nation within Persia is probably wondering what is going on. And as I was reading this again, I'm thinking about if you think of the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, the Jews faced terrible opposition in Jerusalem trying to rebuild, and now they get this news that their enemies are allowed to kill them. So let's just put, if anything could stop the building of the temple or the walls, that might be something to kind of, okay, what's going on here? At one point, the kings of Persia not only give them permission, but help finance building this, and now you're putting out an edict here that we can be put to death. What is going on? Imagine a national policy in our day, in our nation, that would affect a distinct part of the whole population. And imagine that going out, how that would just turn things crazy in the nation. And so that's what's going on here. Esther will learn about this edict, and it will bring about great change in her position as queen. She's been in this position now, as we noticed last week, for 5 years. So she's been queen for 5 years. Evidently, her relationship with Ahasuerus is one that has grown to a point of implicit trust, as we'll see in the following chapters, things that are going to happen here. And he evidently has no reason not to trust her. And so we see that trust going into Esther as it had gone into Haman. She is a confidant that he can trust in and believe. And so, again, we're not going to see that today, but next week we'll see how that starts to happen. And yet, the challenge of the law is still a daunting task for her to even imagine going before her own husband, the king. Again, as we'll see today as we're looking at this. So if you care to follow along, I'll be reading here to begin with in chapter 3 and beginning in verse 14. A copy of the edict to be issued as law in every province was published to all the peoples, so they would be ready for this day. The couriers went out impelled by the king's command, while the decree was issued at the citadel in Susa. And while the king and Haman sat down to drink, the city of Susa was in confusion. And when Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and wailed loudly and bitterly. He went as far as the king's gate, for no one was to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. In each and every province where the command and decree of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay on sackcloth and ashes. I don't know from verse 13 to 14 how much time took place there. I'm sure the capital city got the news first. You know, they probably spread it out and then sent these messengers out, so perhaps the capital city got the news before others do. If you think about the time frame, Esther is going to, when she finds out what's going on, she asks Mordecai to fast for 3 days while she prepares to go and talk to the king. And she does. So in 4 days, we're going to turn this edict around. I'm wondering if some of the people hadn't got the news from the first one before the fourth one is sent out. I have no idea what the time frame is here, but this is a pretty quick turnaround. Esther 4 and 5 and 6 takes place within a week. A week's time is all it goes here before this all happens. So again, I'm not sure how much time passes between 13 and 14. When we get to verse 4, it says that Esther's maidens and her eunuchs came and told her, and the queen writhed in great anguish, and she sent garments to clothe Mordecai, that he might remove his sackcloth from him, but he did not accept them. She knows that what he's doing, but she has no idea why. She doesn't know what's going on. How would you imagine this to be so, with her being the queen? Think about any other position where you got a king and a queen, or a president and, you know, a first lady or whatever. How could she not know what was going on? Any thoughts, Jack?
I think we get some indication in verse 15 of chapter 3 that even with the city in confusion, you have the king and Haman sitting down to drink. I would imagine that in that royal household, which no doubt was marvelous and had many rooms and compartments and so on and so forth, that someone could actually be isolated from what's taking place in the city and the nation. And if they weren't seeking information, they may walk around and be uninformed for some considerable period of time. I would imagine it was a sheltered life for her, because it wasn't like you could turn on the TV and get an update from cable news on what was developing around the world. So I think it was just the result of living a sheltered royal life.
Yeah, and I don't imagine that's much different from today, you know. And I have no idea, but I'm sure there are meetings with the president of our nation and his cabinet that he doesn't confide to his wife about, that she may not know until she sees it on CNN or something, you know. And in these days, you know, you think about the royalty. There's been assassination attempts on King Xerxes. In fact, he's if I remember right, he's eventually killed in an assassination. So you think about, you know, the First Lady of our nation, the Queen of England. Nobody's going out anywhere in public without a bodyguard, and they're probably not going out in public a whole lot. And that's probably the situation here with Esther. She's not every day. She's not going down to the market, the city squares, and, you know, checking out things and buying stuff. She's, as Jack says, she's in a sheltered position here, and so there's things going on that she's not aware of. You know, Lois.
She told Mordecai later she hadn't seen the king in 30 days.
Yeah.
So she hadn't seen
Yeah. It's not like this relationship as they see each other every day and, you know, have breakfast together and go to bed together at night and stuff like this. As Lois mentions, 30 days. She says, I haven't even seen the king for 30 days. I have no clue what's going on. and you want me to go in and make a petition to him, as we'll, get a little ahead here. But anyway, it's not like he confides in her in everything that's going on. And so it's not unreasonable to imagine, some might say, well, how does she not know? Well, think about that for a minute. Wayne, do you have a comment?
I just going to say that, yes, she said she had seen it.
Yeah. So anyway, in verse 5 it says, then Esther summoned Hatak from the king's eunuchs, whom the king had appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. And so Hatak went out to Mordecai to the city square in front of the king's gate. You keep reading this. I think of Hatak as being a ping pong ball. I mean, he's back and forth and back and forth. Go give this to Mordecai and tell him what's going on. And Mordecai says, well, you go tell her this, and you go tell her this, And so they never talk face to face. This is a conversation that is being held through Hatak, and they're revealing a lot of information about themselves, about the fact that she's Jewish. Nobody knew that. But now he's got to figure that out from what Mordecai is going to say. She's got to have some pretty implicit trust in this man and in her maidens to confide in them what's going on and to expose herself now. Before she even goes to the king, she's exposing who she is to those around her, and they know what the edict is now at this point. And so you think about what all she's going through. This is remarkable for what is happening. So continuing in verse 7, Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. And he gave him a copy of the text of the edict, which had been issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show Esther and inform her and order her to go into the king to implore his favor and plead with him for his people. Again, this going back and forth, it's interesting because here Mordecai, the instruction here orders her, says, you go in and talk to the king. This isn't this might be a good idea, and if you have time, he's telling her, you need to go do this, because who else is going to do it? Mordecai, as favored as he was, or any other Jew, going to the king and asking him to rescind this position from the information he's already gotten is probably going to be futile, and he knows that. And so it says, Hatak comes back and relates Mordecai's words to Esther, and Esther orders him now to go back and says, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court who is not summoned has but one law, that he be put to death unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter that he may live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. And they related Esther's words to Mordecai. So she says, you're asking me to put my life on the line here. And I may not even get to talk to the king. Do you understand what you're asking here? And then verse 13 and 14 is probably one of the most familiar passages in the book of Esther. It's probably been preached more than any other passages, I imagine, in Esther. But Mordecai told them, and I don't know who the them is here, but evidently more than Hatak, he says, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish, and who knows whether or not you have attained royalty for such a time as this. So Mordecai lets the cat out of the bag. He's told Esther before, don't reveal who you are, and now here he's telling one of the king's servants, another of the king's servants, to go tell Esther that even though you're in the palace and you're the queen, you're a Jew, and the death penalty is on your head and your family. Your family will be destroyed if this edict is not changed. What are your thoughts about this conversation and what Esther's dealing with here and going through? Jack?
Well, a couple of thoughts. One is that it wasn't that many years ago in the life of Esther that she was an orphan taken in by Mordecai to be supervised by him, but the point is that she was not of royal lineage or heritage or background. And all of a sudden she's thrust into a position that her early life experiences would not have prepared her for at all. And on the other hand, Mordecai is presenting her with a challenge to which she'll rise, but he is also a man of seemingly tremendous faith, because he understands that God has made a promise to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob with regard to the future of the nation, and that salvation will be delivered through the Jews. And he's presenting her with a challenge with regard to what her next move will be. And what hangs in the balance is the extermination of the entire Jewish nation. Well, how are the promises made of old, how are these covenants going to be accomplished if all of the Jews in the known world are exterminated? Because, as you've already pointed out, there were 127 provinces that encompassed this empire that stretched all the way from China eastward to what was then the known world as far as these people were concerned. And so this demonstrates some qualities of people that are truly remarkable in terms of their faith.
We've looked in the past, and I want to continue on your point here with Mordecai's faith. We've compared Esther in the past to Daniel and Joseph and to others who have been thrust into a position not that they chose and now have to do something with that. Do you suppose Mordecai knows the account of Abraham and Isaac going up the mountain? I'm sure he does. And he thinks, Abraham's thinking, okay, I'm going to be the father of great nations, and now my only son I'm going to put him to death. How is this going to happen? And of course, Abraham says, God will provide. I'm not sure where we are in the reading, because I've just gotten involved with it, and I just keep reading, and I don't pay attention to what chapter we're on this week. But the children of Israel, in my reading, have just left Egypt, and they're standing at the Red Sea, and Pharaoh's coming up behind them, and they're all in a dither. What are we going to do? And what's Moses' response? They're saying, you brought us out here to die. We could die in Egypt,
Sit back and watch the Lord.
Yeah. He said, just stand by and watch. God has made a promise to us. I don't know how he's going to fulfill it, but he's made a promise to us, and he's going to do this, And as Jack pointed out, Mordecai understands this. This isn't the first time the Jewish nation has been on the brink of extinction, In Joseph's day, there was a great famine in the land. If Joseph wasn't in Egypt and in the position he was, his family would have died in a famine back in Canaan, Again, Mordecai's faith, and again, as Jack mentioned, even in his prayer, even though God is not mentioned here, and when Esther wants Mordecai to go into fast, I'm sure prayer is involved in that. Mordecai's saying, deliverance will arise for the Jews. Well, it's not going to come from Nebuchadnezzar or Haman. Where's it going to come from? And he knows that Esther knows where it's going to come from. And I may not have any idea how this is going to happen, but then he goes on to say, who knows whether or not you're here, like you say, when they find out that she was a kid of the streets, with no heritage, with nobody, and she's Jewish, off with her head. There's nothing about her that's special to save her life other than the position she put in. And they could almost say that was pretty much by deception. She never told. No one asked, but she never told. And what's to keep anything from happening here to her? And she knows that. And so she's thinking, I'm going to walk into the king's court, and I'm sure most all of you know the account here. For the next 2 or 3 chapters, she has orchestrated this plan with these banquets and timing, getting stuff together, and she's done that in 3 days and got all that in her head and organized how she's going to do this. This gal has some street smarts, and there's something here for her, not only Mordecai's faith, but hers now to do this. And Mordecai tells her, if you don't go, you're going to die anyway. So, it's now or later, you're not going to escape this. And you are the only person here who has the opportunity to do something. Artie, comment?
She's got some smarts, but I also think she's got a little divine help too.
Yeah. I think there's some other things going on here with her fasting and how to organize this and stuff. And if her faith in God is okay, just like Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, I'm going into the fire. Whatever happens, happens. And that example is there. As we mentioned before, Daniel is not that far past, and those men are not that far past her lifetime to know that account and to say, they walked into the fire and God brought them out of there miraculously. I'm walking into a fire. How can we turn verse 14 into a challenge for us? How does that fit me today? What difference does this reading over this do for me other than saying that's quite a story? It's pretty interesting. Carrie?
It reminds me once again that God is faithful, that when his people step out in faith, he's right there, ready to give them what they need and accomplish everything according to his purpose.
Sure. God is there for his people to help. And in this case, who can go? Who is the only one that has any kind of influence with the king? It's Esther. You have, and I used to have coworkers, but I quit, so I retired. I have neighbors, I have family, I have people that you will never know. I have that responsibility to go to them. Not you. I mean, you certainly can do that and need to, but there are people that you have no contact with, no relationship with, that I do. And on the other hand, you work with people, you know people, you're involved with your kids with things that I will never know, or the elders or the evangelists here will never know. You are at that place at that time, and who else is going to teach them? Who else is going to show them? And so when I look at this passage, I don't think about me standing in front of a king. I think of me standing talking to my neighbor. And who knows that this opportunity didn't come about at this point because of this reason. How many individuals sitting here today did not grow up in a Christian, as the Bible describes, home? And how did you find that faith? Something brought you there, and so that's what I see in this point here, Phil.
One of my favorite passages is Ephesians 2:10, telling us that we're God's workmanship and that he's prepared stuff for us to do beforehand, and we need to walk in them.
Yeah.
So when those opportunities show up, this is what we're here for, that this particular person for this particular good work,
Sure. And I'm going to have contacts. I'm going to have contacts with Corvette people that you all probably won't have contacts with, you know. And if all I'm going to do is talk about how cold it is and nasty and I can't get out and drive the car, or all we're going to do is talk about the car, that's one thing. But to use that opportunity to bring Christ into the conversation, and we'll bring everything else in the conversations, you know, but I won't say we, I'll say I. And sometimes we'll ignore that. And then I walk away, that conversation's gone. I think, well, I had a perfect opportunity. It was just me and them, and I didn't say anything. What is wrong with me? And here, Mordecai gives Esther that lecture and says, what are you going to do right now? Verse 15 is a change in this book. Up to this point, what has Esther's demeanor been with Mordecai? And more than likely with the king?
Submissive.
Yeah, submissive, you know. Mordecai raised me, he brought me up. I was, as Jack mentioned, I was an orphan. He didn't have to take me in, but he does, you know, we're family. And he raised me to a point to where I'm put in as queen of a nation, of the greatest nation on the earth, you know. There's certainly some respect for his authority and his requests of her, demands, orders, whatever, that he tells her to do, and she's going to do those. She knows what happened to the last queen who defied the king, so she's not going to go down that road again. But now look in verse 15. And Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go, assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will also fast in the same way, and thus will go to the king, which is not in accordance to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him. Esther's relationship from here on out is going to change. She's certainly still going to be submissive and respectful of authority and understand her position. But what do you see about her, and especially knowing the rest of the account here, what do you see about Esther? Here, Wayne?
She just stepped up, took control, like it says there, commanded him. She didn't say, would you please, or said, this is how it's going to be done. She took hold of the position that she did have,
Yeah.
and put it to a purpose.
Yeah. And she's the queen of Persia. You know, she probably has a right to order people around. She has maidens and servants and people that she probably very respectfully asked them to do things for her all the time. She's been in this position for 5 years, so she knows her way around the palace. And now her demeanor is going to change from one of, she's put on her big girl shoes. And she's going to do what she knows she needs to do in this position, Jack.
Well, in many respects, what happened with her is a classic display of repentance, in the sense that she changed her mind
Sure.
about this situation and came forward with a determined course of action that was quite different from what she was previously thinking about.
Yeah.
Before, she was more or less a passive participant or observer, and now she's going to step into a position of taking control to the extent that she can impact the outcome. But it's a real change of mind for her. It's about what she must do.
And I don't know how much time is taken up here in chapter 4. And this conversation is going back and forth. I always just figured it was the same day. This is a big change. As Jack mentioned here, you know, she has gone from, she's not saying no, but she's giving reasons why this isn't a good idea, to, I'll do this. I will put this on, I will wear this, and I will this is what I'm going to do. And so you do this for me, I'm going to do this. And she says, if I perish, I perish. And so Mordecai goes and does what he's going to do. When we begin verse 5, or chapter 5, we're not going to get into that, but it says, now it came about on the third day. So 3 days later, and I don't know if it's the rest of that day and the next day and then early the next morning, so you've got one full day in between there, if you've got 3 full days. But she's not spent a lot of time. And the edict is to be carried out when? How much time is given for the edict to be carried out? It's the first month. It's the first month of the year. The end of the year. The 12th month, we're going to carry this edict out. When we get to the end of this, we're still in the first month. So, this is not a lot of time that's passed by here. Things are happening very rapidly. And she's, as Artie mentioned, she's on the gun, but I'm pretty sure that, as James says, if you lack wisdom, ask God. I'm sure she's probably asking for a lot of instruction, a lot of guidance here, a lot of strength on how to accomplish this. And so everything here, in beginning in chapter 3, the Jewish world is going to be turned upside down. And in chapter 4 is, what are we going to do about this? And it's similar to, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Moses and the children of Israel. These things can happen in a moment's notice, and an action needs to be taken.
And I think what you mentioned about how quickly this takes place, human nature tells me that if I was out there and hearing this edict, I wouldn't wait till December to kill my Jewish neighbor. He'd be long gone.
Yeah.
A long time before I'd start making plans, and when the opportunity hit, he'd be gone.
Yeah.
And so this happened to happen. It had to happen fast, I believe.
Yeah,
Anyway, so.
yeah. Some of those may have jumped the gun if they had a Jew they didn't particularly care for and think, well, I'll go ahead and destroy him and hide the body and for the next 6 months. Yeah. But anyway, you think of all this that's going on, and certainly things need to happen in a hurry. This can't just sit and wait and kind of see, well, maybe the king will change his mind. Something needs to be done about this. And so we see, again, the urgency in this, and how many... I don't get the newspaper anymore, and so if you go online to look, you have to have a subscription to get online, look at everything in the newspaper, and I don't do that. And I missed a couple. I had a neighbor that passed away, and I didn't even know it because there was no notification. And so I've gone to all the funeral homes in the area and asked me to put them on their mailing list. So when there's an obituary, they send me an email and tell me who's passed away. There are a lot lately, a lot of them my age, a lot of people that I know that are my age and our kids went to school together and stuff that have recently passed away. And when you think about talking to your neighbor, what sometimes comes to mind? Tomorrow, yeah. Wait till the weather gets nicer, Yeah, I go talk to the neighbor, but, we'll wait till they're out mowing the grass and I'm mowing the grass and we'll talk. Like Esther, we need to realize there's an urgency here. And if there's things that we can learn from this book is this needs to be done. I have the opportunity, and God's with me. He's there. Does he want my neighbor to be saved? Sure. Does he want my coworker? Does he want my parents or my children to be saved? Sure he does. What am I doing about it? Where am I at in that?
Well, Paul told us in Colossians 4, to pray for the words of opportunity, and the words of wisdom exceeded the soft. Even though it says Esther and her maiden fasting, we have to believe we're praying those 3 days.
Yeah, there was probably more than she's concentrating on what's about to happen and certainly looking for wisdom. And we need to be careful that when, we're looking for those doors to open and then we take advantage of them. Jack?
It would be extremely disturbing, of course, for the Jews to be in this situation. I mean, we're talking about Mordecai and Esther because they're the main characters, but you think about the impact that this would have on the Jewish nation and the despondency that would prevail. But somehow Mordecai still has faith that this edict is not going to be carried out, despite the fact that the Israelites were carried off into captivity and the Jews were carried off into captivity. But he might have been recalling or understanding what Jeremiah had said, which was, even though I have rejected my people, he said something along the lines of, as long as day is day and night is night, I will restore them and I will not reject them. So he knew, he may have known through even the prophecies of Jeremiah that God's will was going to be accomplished, which would continue the race to achieve what had been promised even to Father Abraham.
Yeah, and tagging off of that, you remember that God said, you'll know if a prophet is faithful as my prophet if what happens. If what he says comes true. Jeremiah said, in 70 years you're going home. Those of you that want to go home, you can go home. That 70 years has come and gone. Everything that God has promised has happened for them. And Mordecai, mentions here, he says, deliverance is going to arise. It's going to happen, And he knows that the king cannot rescind this edict. That's a law. Once we looked at this before, once it's a law, it's a law. You can't take that back. He couldn't put Vashti back as queen. When he came back and he was all depressed and thinking about her, there was no way she was going to be put back. You can't rescind a law that's been passed. And Mordecai is, I'm sure, thinking, I don't know how this is going to work. But with God, nothing is what? Impossible, And as we continue on this fantastic journey, we'll see that, if there's things about the books of the Old Testament that we're studying, it's things to build our faith on, to see where God says, I'm going to do this. And he does it. And he may not say it in the book of Esther, but as Jack mentioned, he said it in Jeremiah. He said it in Isaiah. He said it in the other prophets. Zechariah and Malachi are prophesying at this same time, and they're telling the Jews, God is going to do this and this and this. Well, that can't happen if there's no Jewish nation. And so that confirms that God can do something to make this happen and to keep them strong. And I hope that that's one thing we can learn from this study, is that as our Christian life, if I'm serving God, he will never let me down. It's not going to happen. He will always be there. Artie?
We have the privilege, I guess, whatever, of being able to read it and know what the outcome is. But, I think, Mordecai actually, he has the knowledge to understand, and even passes on to Esther, maybe God actually put you in this position as queen just for this task.
Sure. And it's recorded for us.
Yeah. And like I said, we can see it because we see the outcome, but they hadn't seen the outcome.
Yeah. And Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego said, if God doesn't care to save us, I'm still, this is what I'm doing. We're out of time. Thanks so much for your patience tonight and your own study and sharing in as we go through this.